story begins in the early 20th century, a turbulent time in both American and Cuban history, shaped by economic opportunity, the rise of criminal organizations, and unexpected alliances. In America, the Mafia was an emerging power, establishing control over the criminal underworld. Meanwhile, Cuba was going through political unrest in the wake of its newly established independence from Spain back in 1902. This political instability would lay the foundation for the world of organized crime and political corruption to meet. But the question remains, how did the Italian Mafia first make its way to Cuba? To answer that, we have to look at the United States during Prohibition and its impact on the Italian Mafia.
World War I is over, and so are America's days of legal alcoholic drink. Convinced self-sacrifice and sobriety will bring prosperity and peace. As it won victory in war, Americans praise passing of the dry law.
In January 17, 1920, Prohibition officially went into effect under the Volstead Act. Championed by the temperance movement and religious groups, Prohibition aimed to rid America of its so-called demon drink. But instead of ushering in an era of moral purity, it plunged the country into chaos. For ordinary Americans, life quickly adapted. Speakeasies sprang up in every city, and bootleggers became household names. It wasn't just a ban on alcohol, it was a prohibition on fun, rebellion, and freedom itself. And where laws create restrictions, opportunity for crime always follows. Enter the Italian Mafia. To them, Prohibition wasn't a social crusade, it was a golden ticket. By controlling the supply of illegal liquor, they transformed themselves from petty street gangs into vast criminal empires. Just 90 miles from Florida, Cuba was perfectly positioned to become the Mafia's secret weapon during Prohibition. The island was a paradise of rum distilleries, corrupt officials, and lax regulations, an ideal launching pad for smuggling operations. As American shores tightened their grip, Mafia figures partnered with Cuban officials to ensure a steady flow of illicit liquor into the United States. But Cuba wasn't just a waypoint, it was an investment. The Italian Mafia didn't just stop at smuggling. They began laying the groundwork for an empire in Cuba. Casinos, brothels, and gambling halls popped up across Havana, funded by mob bosses eager to expand their influence. Even after Prohibition ended in 1933, their foothold in Cuba remained a critical piece of their operations. At the heart of this underworld empire was a larger-than-life figure by the name of Salvatore Lucania. Born in Italy, Luciano arrived in New York City in 1906, a wide-eyed 9-year-old from Sicily. The American dream seemed a world away. But in the shadowy alleys of Manhattan's Lower East Side, Lucania, better known as Lucky Luciano, found his path to infamy. By his late teens, Luciano was already climbing the ranks of New York's underworld. But unlike other mobsters of his time, Luciano wasn't content with petty rackets. He saw the Mafia as a fragmented beast, powerful, yes, but unruly and divided by old-world rivalries. And he had a vision to change it all. In 1931, Luciano made his move. In a brazen and bloody coup, he orchestrated the murders of Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano, the two most powerful mafia bosses in New York. With their deaths, Luciano dismantled the old guard, ushering in a new era of organized crime. Luciano didn't just take control, he revolutionized the Mafia. Under his leadership, the infamous commission was born, a council of mafia families that replaced infighting with structure and strategy. Luciano transformed the Mafia into a business empire, profiting from bootlegging, gambling, narcotics, and prostitution. And at the center of it all was Luciano himself, the undisputed king of the underworld. But even kings have enemies. In 1936, law enforcement finally caught up with Luciano. New York prosecutor Thomas Dewey built a case that linked Luciano to a vast prostitution ring, accusing him of profiting off the exploitation of women. Though Luciano denied the charges, the evidence and witness testimonies proved damning. He was convicted and sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison. For many, it seemed like the end of Luciano's reign. Yet Luciano's influence was not so easily extinguished. Even behind bars, his name carried weight, and his empire continued to operate. And then, World War II offered an unlikely chance for redemption. In 1942, German U-boats were sinking American ships along the East Coast, and fear of sabotage loomed large. Desperate for help, the US government turned to an unlikely ally, Lucky Luciano. Luciano used his mafia connections to secure the docks, providing intelligence that kept America's war effort moving. In return for his cooperation, Luciano received a reduced sentence, but with one catch. In 1946, he was deported to Italy and exiled from the empire he had built. Exile might have removed Luciano from the streets of New York, but it didn't strip him of ambition. Frustrated by the constraints of post-war Italy, Luciano set his sights on a new opportunity just across the Atlantic. Havana, Cuba, a vibrant city where corruption ran rampant. In Havana, Luciano found an old ally waiting, Meyer Lansky, the Mafia's financial wizard. Together, they saw in Cuba a chance to create a new empire. With its thriving tourism industry, lax regulations, and corruption, Cuba offered the perfect setting for the Mafia's next chapter. Luciano's arrival in Cuba wasn't just about business, but about reclaiming power. For Luciano, Havana was more than a refuge. It was a stage, a chance to remind the world that he was still a force to be reckoned with. But how did Cuba's existing political atmosphere set the foundation for the Mafia's expansion into the nation? What alliances were formed to pave the way for one of the most important periods in Cuban and mob history?